World War II was the most destructive war in history. It killed more people, cost more money, damaged more property, affected more people, and caused more far-reaching changes in nearly every country than any other war in history. The number of people killed, wounded, or missing between 1939 and 1945 can never be calculated. It is estimated that more than 62 million people perished, many of them innocent civilians. More than 50 countries took part in the war, and the whole world felt its effects. Men fought in almost every part of the world, on every continent except Antarctica. Chief battlegrounds included Asia, Europe, North Africa, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and the Mediterranean Sea. The United States hoped to stay out of any conflicts. Drawing on its experience from World War I, Congress passed a series of neutrality acts between 1935 and 1939. They were spurred by the growth in isolationism and non-interventionism in the U.S. following its costly involvement in World War I, and sought to ensure that the U.S. would not become entangled again in foreign conflicts. The legacy of the Neutrality Acts is widely regarded as having been generally negative. They made no distinction between aggressor and victim, and they limited the U.S. government's ability to aid Britain and France against Nazi Germany. The acts were largely repealed in 1941 in the face of German submarine attacks on U.S. vessels and the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. World War II was the result of the expansionist ambitions of Nazi Germany's Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Germany started World War II by invading Poland on September 1, 1939. Britain and France responded by declaring war on Germany on September 3rd. Within a month, Poland was defeated by a combination of German and Soviet forces and was partitioned between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. This led to the opposition of two major military alliances, which included the Allied powers, which were mainly the U.S., Russia, France, England, and China, and the Axis powers, which included Germany, Italy, and Japan. Between 1939 and 1942, the Axis powers occupied most of Europe. The German military achieved most of its great victories with the Blitzkrieg tactic. Blitzkrieg was named because it included surprise attacks. Lightning-fast, rapid advances into enemy territory with coordinated massive air attacks, which struck and shocked the enemy as if it was struck by lightning. Italy signed their pact with Nazi Germany on May 22, 1939. Italy joined Germany and declared war on France and Great Britain on June 10, 1940. Hitler had two aims. The first, to seize all of Europe and North Africa so he could dominate the Mediterranean, and the second to wipe out communism and eliminate the Jews. His ally, Benito Mussolini, had his own aims, domination of both the Mediterranean and the Balkans. Italy hoped to take advantage of German success to grab territory for itself. By the end of 1940, Great Britain stood their ground against Germany by having an immensely powerful Royal Navy, aided by the increasingly dangerous Royal Air Force. The U.S. also provided supplies to Great Britain. In the East, on June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, which was the name given to Nazi Germany's invasion of Russia. Barbarossa was the largest military attack of World War II and was to have appalling consequences for the Russian people.
On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. After just 2 hours of bombing, the Japanese airstrike left chaos, 2,400 dead, 188 destroyed planes, and a crippled Pacific Fleet that included 21 damaged or destroyed battleships. The attack at Pearl Harbor so outraged Americans that the U.S. abandoned its policy of isolationism and declared war on Japan the following day, officially bringing the United States into World War II. The Pearl Harbor attack destroyed or badly damaged 8 American battleships and left the United States Pacific Fleet greatly inferior in power to the Japanese Imperial Navy. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, marked the turning point of the war in the Pacific and is considered one of the most decisive battles of World War II. The Battle of Midway effectively destroyed Japan's naval strength when the Americans destroyed 4 of its aircraft carriers. Japan's navy never recovered from its mauling at Midway, and it was on the defensive after this battle. The Battle of Midway would prove to be a decisive contest for naval supremacy in the Central Pacific region between the United States Navy and the Japanese Imperial Navy. Japan's casualties were around 3,057. The American casualties were approximately 307. The Battle of Stalingrad was a major turning point in the war in Europe. The battle bled the German army dry in Russia, and after this defeat, the German army was in full retreat. The battle for Stalingrad was fought during the winter of 1942 to 1943. The German defeat proved that Hitler's army was not unstoppable. It also proved that Hitler was a flawed military leader. His adamant refusal to let his commanders retreat, when strategically wise, cost him hundreds of thousands of able soldiers and untold amounts of weaponry and other equipment. Operation Torch was the name of the Allied invasion of Northwest Africa in the hopes and goal of removing the Axis presence on the continent. The operation marked the first time that British and American forces worked together on an invasion plan and would take place from November 6 through 16, 1942. The operation resulted in a major victory for the Allies and would also include the first major airborne assault carried out by the United States. On June 6, 1944, the Battle of Normandy, D-Day, was fought between the Allied nations and German forces occupying Western Europe. More than 60 years later, D-Day remains the largest seaborne invasion in history, involving nearly 3 million troops crossing the English Channel from England to Normandy in occupied France. 12 Allied nations provided fighting units that participated in the invasion, including Australia, Canada, Belgium, France, Czechoslovakia, Greece, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. By nightfall on June 6th, more than 9,000 Allied soldiers were dead or wounded, but more than 100,000 had made it ashore and secured French coastal villages. The occupation of Normandy was crucial for the Western Allies to bring the war to the western border of Germany. The Battle of the Bulge, fought over the winter months of 1944-45, was the last major Nazi offensive against the Allies in World War II. The battle was the last attempt by Hitler to split the Allies in two in their drive towards Germany.
This was the Nazis' last effort, and German offenses took a deadly toll. At the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies suffered close to 70,000 casualties, most of them American. But the effort cost the Germans far more: 200,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,500 planes that could not be replaced. In the spring of 1945, the Allies' unstoppable advance across Germany resumed. British and American forces swept north, taking the heavily industrialized Ruhr Valley and critical ports along the North Sea. Another army swung further to the south, mopping up along the Danube River. American General Omar Bradley's army advanced across central Germany, but after considerable debate did not march on Berlin. The German capital was left to the Soviets, who were dead set on reaching Berlin first. On April 23, 1945, Soviet troops reached Berlin, with over 1 million men and more than 20,000 pieces of artillery. A few days later, Soviet troops advancing from the east met up with U.S. troops advancing from the west at the Elbe River. With the end of World War II imminent and the Russians nearing Hitler's underground bunker under the Chancellery building in Berlin, Nazi leader Adolf Hitler commits suicide on April 30, 1945. On May 2, 1945, Soviet troops completed the capture of Berlin, and all remaining German troops surrendered within a few days. World War II in Europe ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945. The German surrender was given to the Western Allies, including Britain and the U.S., on May 8th, and to Russia on May 9th. World War II was the setting of the largest genocide in history, known as the Holocaust, from 1933 through 1945. The Holocaust inflicted upon European Jews by the Nazi regime was arguably the most systematic and sadistic campaign of mass extermination ever mounted. Hitler and his followers enacted legislation making the Nazi doctrines of racism and anti-Semitism the law of the land. The program was instituted in 4 phases. First, the economic persecution of German Jews. Second, the passage and enforcement of legislation to remove Jews from the German public and social life. Third, the forced removal of Jews from their homes in Germany and conquered lands. And fourth, the eradication of all Jews through systematic mass murder known as the final solution. It is very difficult to determine how many deaths occurred, but estimates suggest that somewhere between 10 and 17 million people lost their lives in this genocide. On July 27, 1945, the Allied powers requested Japan in the Potsdam Declaration to surrender unconditionally or destruction would continue. On July 28th, Japanese Prime Minister Suzuki responded by telling the press that his government was paying no attention to the Allied ultimatum. U.S. President Harry Truman ordered the dropping of the atomic bomb to proceed, and on August 6th, the U.S. B-29 bomber Enola Gray dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th. The atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima killed an estimated 80,000 people and fatally wounded thousands more. On August 14th, however, the Emperor of Japan finally decided to surrender unconditionally. President Truman appointed MacArthur to head the Allied occupation of Japan as Supreme Commander of the Allied powers. World War II would go down in the history books as bringing about the downfall of Western Europe as the center of world power, leading to the rise of the USSR and setting up conditions leading to the Cold War and opening up the nuclear age. World War II took the lives of more people than any other war in history. Eastern Europe and East Asia suffered the heaviest losses. Germany and the Soviet Union and the nations that had been ground between them may have lost as much as 1/10 of their populations. This war was the most expensive war in history. It has been estimated that the cost of the war totaled between 1 and 2 trillion, and the property damage amounted to more than 239 billion. The United States spent about 10 times as much as it had spent in all previous wars put together. Now, let's take a look at this World War II video highlighting how World War II began.
After roughly 20 years of peace, the world went to war for a second time. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be exploring how World War II began. The Second World War is considered a direct result of the First World War due to unresolved tensions and anger from that conflict. However, the Great Depression of the 1930s was another factor that led to bitterness and a shift in public attitudes towards strict dictatorships. World War I also facilitated the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. Hitler's allies in Italy and Japan also acted aggressively with the hope of expanding their territories. Hostilities by these countries towards the communism of the Soviet Union was just another factor that helped lead to war. In fact, a number of ideologies helped spark the war. Aggressive expansionism by countries like Germany and Italy, fascist dictatorships, and deep-seated racism were all considered contributing factors. This racism was mostly in Germany, where the Nazis believed the Aryan race was the master race and superior to the Slavic people. The countries that eventually formed the Allied alliance acted passively in the face of the Axis threat. This was partly out of sympathy, partly out of guilt because of the Treaty of Versailles that blamed the Germans for World War I, and partly because countries like Britain underestimated Hitler. Meanwhile, the League of Nations proved itself ineffective in the fight to keep the peace. A few months after Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, Germany did the same. In 1935, Germany violated the Treaty of Versailles by introducing mandatory military conscription and by beginning rearmament. That country continued to violate the treaty in the years that followed. In fact, in 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. It was around this time Nazi Germany formed their important alliance with Italy. Soon after, the two countries offered support to the separatist movement in the Spanish Civil War, while the existing government was supported by the Soviet Union. These events foreshadowed the Second World War, as both sides were testing different methods and weapons of battle. One specific event that foretold the horrors of World War II was the April 1937 bombing of Guernica. By 1938, Hitler's motives were clearer. In a move referred to as the Anschluss, the Nazis annexed Austria into Germany, despite the fact this also violated the Treaty of Versailles. Later that year, Hitler was appeased by both Britain and France when they signed the Munich Agreement. This allowed Hitler to overtake a German-speaking section of Czechoslovakia in order to keep the peace. In August 1939, Nazi Germany signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union. However, the first official event of World War II followed soon after. Due to long-standing tensions, Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. Britain and France warned Germany that should the troops not withdraw, war was imminent. When the Nazis did nothing, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II officially began.